And we're about ready to get to hear some more answers. We're talking to Christine Powell. She's a Professor Emeritus at the University of Memphis. Christine, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Amazing. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Well, first off, can you just kind of break it down and tell us what an earthquake is? What happened this morning and what did we feel?
Okay. Well, there are, as Kent Moran said previously, places in the earth that are fractured or cracked. And when the two sides of those cracks sort of move relative to one another very slowly over very long time periods, like your hands rubbing together, eventually there's so much pressure there, on difference on either side, that this area breaks as a fault, and then you get an earthquake. It's a very slow process usually that requires the buildup of pressure for a very long time.
Okay, and we just heard some voicemails from people into our newsroom that sounded concerned. They were unsure of what happened because it was maybe a little scary for some people. And that's because we're not used to seeing magnitudes quite this strong. Is that right?
That's correct, particularly in the eastern Tennessee seismic zone. That is correct, yes.
Okay.
And could you possibly explain to us why or how people in other states felt this earthquake, how it traveled?
Okay, well, in the eastern United States, the earth is pretty solid. You know, you live on a rocky crust here that isn't all broken up by as many faults as, say, in California. So when we have an earthquake here, the energy that is released by that earthquake tends to travel very far. That's why when the big New Madrid earthquakes happened in 1811 and 1812, there were people who felt them in Boston, for example. And so that makes the earthquake hazard here in the eastern U.S. very high because, again, the energy travels very, very far.
That totally makes sense. And now earlier we called into our meteorologist, Cassie Nall. She's actually in Florida right now, but was able to give us a little bit of insight. And she was talking to us a little bit how a 4.1 magnitude earthquake maybe for us here in East Tennessee felt pretty strong. But if, for example, we were in California, maybe we wouldn't have had the same reaction. Can you kind of explain the differences in where we are in the United States and how that kind of might come into effect or come into play?
Yes, in the western U.S., the earth is really cut up by many, many faults. It's on a plate boundary, and there's one plate moving with respect to the other, and so there are little earthquakes generated all the time, thousands. And people there, first of all, will not feel the energy from one earthquake as far as people here in the eastern U.S., so they don't have as much shaking and rattling from a comparably sized earthquake in California. Plus, people in California, for example, have become aware of earthquakes. And so when they do feel some shaking, it's not the same thing here as in the East, where we're totally unaware of what's going on. And I was struck by the reactions of the people that you recorded, particularly the first woman who spoke. I could hear the fear in her voice, and this makes our work important. In California, people, they're told about earthquakes all the time, and they're somewhat used to them. But here in the East Coast, where energy from even a 4, earthquake magnitude 4, will travel pretty far, we are just not prepared mentally to understand what is going on. So it's very, very frightening.
Your work is so important, and we are so thankful that you've been able to talk with us. My next question is about what tools or sensors are used to detect and figure out what magnitude these earthquakes are?
Yes, we use seismic instruments that we have calibrated, and we know from the recordings that these instruments make. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but there used to be pictures of a pen going up and down on a drum, and as high as the pen goes will tell you something about the size of the earthquake, how much energy is released. And it's the same thing now with the digital instruments. We know from how large the signals are recorded by these seismometers, how large the earthquake is. That's all as part of our magnitude scales that have been developed over the years very precisely.
Right. And I know that recording this work is so important. It is what you do, and Kent was talking to us a little bit about that and the importance of reporting. Now, the Central U.S. Earthquake Consortium has said, they sent out a tweet saying that so far more than 17,000 people have reported feeling that quake. Is that number something that is consistent with what you would expect? I guess, how does that compare? 17,000 seems like a lot of people. Of course, we were saying our phones were ringing off the hooks, and we've gotten a lot of emails. Is that typical here in East Tennessee?
Well, it would be, yeah, I think so for this magnitude earthquake. I think it's wonderful that people are reporting because, as Kent said, this goes into our database. Then we can use these reactions by people to further understand what this earthquake, how deep it was, how strong it was. We can add all this into our database, translating how people feel and the damage that earthquakes cause into a more reliable magnitude scale. So all of this is very, very important.
Right. And so for people who might still be concerned, who maybe, again, this morning was a little bit scary, a little frightening, maybe a little unexpected, what advice would you have to give to people? Is there anything that you think people should do or just be aware of? Or, is there no risk? Is everyone okay to just continue business as usual?
Well, yes, I think people can get on with their lives and continue what they do without worrying. But there may be aftershocks. This was a very deep earthquake, very unusually deep, but it still may produce some aftershocks. And so don't be afraid. If you feel a slight rumble, these aftershocks will probably be less in magnitude than this 4.1, so they'll be smaller earthquakes. But don't be alarmed if you still feel occasional shaking and your house seems to move around, everything. It's going to be okay. These are smaller earthquakes, they're aftershocks, and you should not be alarmed.
A really important message. And the National Weather Service in Morristown did say that fellow scientists at the USGS forecast only a 23% chance to see a magnitude 3 or higher aftershock within the week. And they say to remember that the scale is logarithmic, so a 3.0 is 10 times weaker than a 4.0, like what we experienced this morning. But that is certainly a good message that, again, 23% chance to see a magnitude 3 or higher within the week.
Yeah, and my next question is kind of about those aftershocks. Is there a time frame when we can kind of stop worrying about if one might occur? I know you said it would likely be weaker, but I'm just curious if there's a time when usually aftershocks occur.
Well, here in the East, they can occur for weeks after an earthquake of this size. I wouldn't be surprised if our instruments, which are very sensitive, would be recording aftershocks, say, even a month after this earthquake. But they wouldn't necessarily be felt by people. So the information that you got about the magnitude 3 is really critical for people living in the area. You may get a few 2s or something like that a few people might feel, but the risk from any further damage or anything coming from these aftershocks is really low. But as scientists, we will hopefully be recording some small events for weeks to a month or so from now.
Right. And Christine, the last question for you, we asked Kent this as well, but you mentioned that research and how you hope to be recording what's happening in the future. So why is that research important? Why does it matter, and how can people help with that?
Okay, people can help. Again, if you feel anything, go to Did You Feel It, or contact Kent or someone at Siri so we can record those observations. Why the aftershocks are important is that they can tell us something about the fault at depth. You know, the earthquake occurs at a certain location, but if we have aftershocks moving away from that earthquake in a certain direction, for example, we might be able to tell more about how that fault is oriented, and that might give us more information about its size and its capacity to release energy. It will be very, very important for us to understand more about that fault at depth. And because it's so deep, we have no chance of seeing any surface breakage associated with that fault like you would see in California, for example. Our faults here they don't break the surface in most instances, and so we rely upon the aftershock data to tell us more about what is going on deep in the earth.
Amazing. Well, thank you for sharing that with us. To anyone watching, again, you do have the chance to contribute to that data and share your experiences by Googling Did You Feel It? That's how you can find that and report that. Christine, thank you so much for joining us this morning. We really appreciate your insight.
Thank you, Christine.
You're welcome. My pleasure.